Hello and welcome to Industry Today, the podcast powered by MTC Events. Today we are diving into one of the most critical topics shaping our future, and that is, of course, sustainability. I'm joined today by Guido Sicuro from KPMG, whose work sits right at the crossroads of data, AI and sustainability strategy. Welcome to the podcast, Guido.
Thank you, Lauren.
So, before we get into it, could you give our listeners and viewers an insight into your role at KPMG and how that then ties back into sustainability?
Sure. So I'm part of the KPMG UK team. I sit in what we call the MBS team, which stands for Microsoft Business Solutions. So we are helping customers with everything around Microsoft technology. And my specific role is Copilot Data Lead. So I sit in our broader Copilot team, and specifically I lead and focus on everything that has to do with Microsoft when it comes to data, but also how that links, as you said, to sustainability and AI. So essentially we call it data enablement for AI or data enablement for sustainability.
Okay.
So the whole idea is really how do you use technology, and specifically in my case, data, to enable these journeys. So that's how I got in touch with sustainability. There's a large data component, been working on it for a few years. Mm-hmm. So really just helping navigate how these three things come together and how you can enable them.
So why is now so critical for businesses to be addressing their sustainability agenda?
I think that's a good question. So I think there's multiple pieces to it. It's the now is the key part. Mm-hmm. So I think sustainability has always been critical and has been for a long time underestimated, and the role it played in business, besides in our society and the world. And the reality is that we had a huge trigger, of course, with the regulations in the past couple of years changing. So things like CSRD, like ISSB coming, that put pressure on organizations to actually take the topic seriously and start to engage and do better.
Can you just explain what that means for people that might not know the language, or what those regulations actually mean for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what really happened in the last few years is we've always had some sort of requirements around sustainability. But what happened essentially is, if you look at the UK, if you look at Europe, has been quite leading in this. What has happened is that a lot of governments has been putting pressure on sustainability performance of businesses.
Okay.
What essentially means is there's a lot of new legislations that are coming out. And they are actually not compulsory, they're mandatory. So it's going to be part of your annual reporting, like your financial reporting. Mm-hmm. So companies are actually forced to comply to those regulations, report on certain metrics, and also showcase the traceability audit behind it. So it's not just about compliance, it's also about assurance. And that has put a lot of pressure on the topic. But the key thing was also that a lot of these regulations were not isolated to where they generated from. So if you take CSRD, it started in Europe, but essentially the initial idea was it's going to affect any company that has any sort of operations in Europe. That means a lot of UK companies, a lot of global companies. Same thing with ISSB. So there's definitely a lot of standards, a lot of regulations. They tackle the same topics, but slightly different angles, slightly different standards.
Yep.
And that has put a deadline and pressure on everyone. But going back to why now, I think the key thing is also the geopolitical scenario we're looking at. Essentially, so regulations put pressure, kind of triggered that. But then there's another key topic, which is we are operating in a system where resources are scarce, where there's a lot of discussions around resources and exchange of resources across countries and markets. Mm-hmm. So that automatically generates also a bigger question around sustainability, which is how do you actually approach that? Mm-hmm. Because again, sustainability is about environment, but it's a lot more than just that.
So these regulations, do they apply to companies of all sizes? Are there certain criteria you have to fall in line with to comply to them?
Yeah, so we would have to of course look at the different legislations, different standards. Yeah. I think in general what you see as if you try kind of to generalize it, what you see is that there's sort of waves. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these regulations, what they have done is they have kind of grouped organizations based on certain metrics. Usually it's number of employees, revenue, and essentially what they did is they started either using that classification as waves in which you have to comply, which means some companies that are bigger might should have had to comply this year, others maybe a bit later to give them a bit more time. And in some cases also the requirements can change a bit depending on the scale of the organization. Yeah. But ultimately it will affect, if not all, almost everyone. But not just because of the legislation, it's also because of the intrinsic nature of the topic. So if we look at, for example, carbon emissions, Scope 3 is all those emissions that are part of your value chain, of your supply chain. I think I'm quite confident saying it's basically impossible to operate as a standalone organization nowadays. Yeah. Which means you are someone's partner or someone is your partner, and that means you also have to report to help them do their reporting. So essentially, it just impacts the whole system.
Yeah, so the whole ecosystem of your business,
Yeah.
your partners, your suppliers, whoever you're working with, you have to factor in all of that.
Yeah.
The obviously regulations are great because they're forcing people down a route that they should be going to ultimately. But how do you get businesses to shift their mindset so that it's not just about compliance, but actually they see sustainability as part of their longer term strategy, and they also see the benefits of behaving in that way?
Yeah, I think that is the challenge, right? So I think that's a lot of the conversations we also have with clients and a lot of the current, let's say, topic and discussion around the topic, which is from one side there is the compliance bit, there's the reporting bit, and that's a bit your homework, and you have to do it. The reality, though, is that doesn't do much, because essentially you're going to generate a report that says you do good, you do bad, but doesn't really say much about what you're doing about it and what's changing. Now, there's a few factors in it. I think there is first of all, the fact that the first year of reporting on any of these standards will be easy. But the reality is also that most of these standards also require you to set targets, which means that the second year you're going to actually have to perform against those targets. And if not, you're going to have to explain why. But most importantly, that makes this information public. And what we are seeing is actually a very big push from markets towards businesses to change that. So what's happening is, essentially access to capitals is changing. That means that if you're not a sustainable organization, if you cannot show that you are driving a sustainable business, you're probably going to have more difficulty to access capital. You're going to have harsh interest rates. It's going to be harder for you to get capital. Same things around talent. We've been talking a lot with youngsters, with students, and we've been asking, what are you looking for in a company? What's your dream job look like? And you'd be surprised how many refer to, I want to work for a good company. I want to work for a company that does good.
Yeah, which is great, isn't it? That's where, people are now putting their value in a job. But I guess the challenge comes from maybe higher up, when people are used to operating in a certain way and now they're being forced to change because of the laws and the legislations. And
that's the thing, right? Yeah. And then you also have the consumers, the investors. So I think what you see, and we'll talk about it, I think, later on, but the thing is, it's really, if you take the word sustainability and think of the broader meaning of it, it's not just, again, about, let's do good for the environment. Yeah, that's a big piece of it. But the reality is, it also has a business component to it. So if you look at it, it has to change towards your stakeholders, toward talent, toward the impression you give, basically your reputation.
Yeah, of course.
But then on the other side, you also have to think of it of how do I run a sustainable business, which also means how do I make sure I'm resilient enough. So again, if you work in a market where resources are scarce, being sustainable also means being resilient, being able to deal with the scarcity of those resources. Yeah. So automatically you also see investors, and you see, actually the people behind these companies changing the way they look at it. There's also a lot of sustainability metrics being inputted around investments evaluations. Okay. So when evaluating an investment, a lot of companies now are looking at, okay, is that a sustainable investment? And again, take sustainability as the broader word, and then that makes sense. But it's really, I think, a pressure coming from multiple angles. With that said, that is the challenge. Is for a lot of companies, it is hard, like you said, to rethink their business and factor this in. And in some cases, it can be easier because of the nature of the business. In others, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, the stakeholder pressures are internal and external. So how do some of your clients deal with that? Where are these pressures coming from?
Well, we again, it's very sector specific. So we see it happening in different ways in different areas. But I think it's across the board, and it might be the let's say intensity of that pressure changes for different companies. But ultimately, what we're seeing is just a lot of pressure coming from all angles. So what a lot of our clients are really dealing with is, how do I actually showcase to everyone that we are a sustainable business, and all the meaning of that word. What I mean is, if you look, for example, at the classic retail consumer goods, there's a lot of pressure from consumers. There's a lot of pressure from consumers that if they go on a shelf and see two products, they're probably going to pick the product that's more sustainable, even if it has a slightly higher price. Yeah. Which then also gets interesting, because then there's a whole discussion of, okay, can I actually generate margin and revenue out of sustainability? And that's really where companies need to be looking at. But on the other hand, you also see a lot of companies that are struggling now to get access to investments and capitals, because they're getting pressure from investors or financial institutions saying you're not sustainable, so you're not allowed to get as much access as before, or you're going to have a higher interest rate. Yeah. And then you have the larger ones that might not deal directly with this, but then they have the pressure of the reputation they have in the market, on their value of their stock, on their suppliers, on again, as we mentioned earlier, it's a whole value chain.
Yeah.
So you don't just get pressure from your consumers or the people you work with, but also your suppliers and the people you supply to are actually starting to have new procurement rules. Because if you look at a lot of procurement now, has a large sustainability element to it. So ultimately, you're put almost in a corner where to be able to operate, you need to be more sustainable. And when I say this, it's not about the next few months.
Yeah.
It's of course a long-term vision.
Yeah.
But it is going to be hard to keep in business if you don't find a way to be more sustainable in the coming years.
Yeah, I was just about to say exactly that. It's not just the short term here and now. What do we need to do as a business? It's where are we trying to get to? And like you say, companies will come up against increasingly more hurdles because everyone around them is having to do these things for the right reasons, but ultimately they will impact businesses in that way.
Exactly, and that's I think the thing is the whole system needs to change.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge is of course how, and
Yeah.
that really can go very deep into an organization, because that's the thing with sustainability. It's really spread across your organization. So I think where we see a lot of organizations right now is either a bit underestimating the problem, which that's one of the things they really need to watch out for. Or a lot of organizations are right now in the phase of trying to understand, what does it mean for us, and if we do want to embed this as part of our business, what is the transformations we need to go through? Because it's also not a one thing, right? So you cannot say, I'm going to be more sustainable as a company. You need to think of, okay, what does that mean in your procurement department? What does that mean in your finance department? What does that mean in your operations?
Business,
So that will probably be a lot of sub-projects and in transformations. The important thing is that you keep in mind the overall change and program.
Yeah, so where you're trying to get to, but then how that impacts the different parts of the business, essentially. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know your role is very much involved with data and AI. So how can those two elements support company sustainability initiatives? They must play a big part in it.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do. So I think that there's so many things we could go through. I think the one I want to start from is a bit close to my heart, and that's the data bit, right?
Yeah.
So that's my background. That's what I enjoy. And the reality of things is, I often tell clients, from a technical point of view, this is not a new challenge, because essentially we've, I think, been talking about data for years. We just got off the whole data-driven dream. We finally realized that shouldn't be a goal of its own, but it should be serving other business objectives. But in essence, the point is, we've been dealing with lack of data or bad quality of data, or not enough information across things outside of sustainability forever. Now, what we see with sustainability is that the scale is different, because again, if you compare it, for example, to financial data, which is of course always very relevant and sensitive, is financial data is almost in a vertical. You in most cases can point directly at where it is, because there is some sort of billing system, ERP system. There's always somewhere where the data is being collected, because it's what you need to drive the business. Now with sustainability, the problem is that you take that and you just blow it up across the whole organization, right? So you're going to end up, trying to get finding some data in dispersed places. You're going to find that a lot of the data is not available because it's not collected yet.
Okay.
So it's very hard that someone will be asking, for example, the circular metrics of a product they purchased, simply because you were never asked that, so you didn't think of collecting that information. So a lot of data missing, dispersed data, issues around data quality, around the reliability of the data. So there's a lot of issues, essentially foundational issues with the data. So I think the first piece is around, okay, how do you actually deal with that? So, how do you collect all this data? How do you give your organization and the people in it and your partners a system that can help them generate, collect, or record the data? Once you do that, how do you make sure that it's all standardized, modeled, that's clean? So you need to do all those, foundational data steps to first and foremost be able to report, if that's solely your goal. Because even if you just want to keep your ambition low, you're still going to need the data.
Yeah.
And second, of course, to get a right foundation to then build on. And then on top of that, of course, you can think of all the power AI can bring. We often talk about the advantages AI can bring in an organization from a back office efficiency, automation perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective. There's so many use cases, and I tend to group them kind of into areas. I always say, you have the efficiency part of it. So you could think of how can you use AI to actually drive efficiency around sustainability.
Yeah.
So that can be through AI use cases for reporting. So maybe generating a draft of your report with AI, or through generating data when you have gaps to kind of mitigate that. And then you have what I call more the sustainable innovation use cases, which is really more about, okay, can you use AI to actually find new business opportunities? Maybe design your products differently, find new resources. So can you use AI to actually drive sustainability and not just make it more efficient to report on it? So I think there's definitely a lot that can be done there.
Huge amounts of opportunity. But I guess it's understanding what's relevant for your business, the size and scale, the sector that you operate in, because the opportunities are so vast, aren't they?
Yeah, and understand it's a journey. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of times we see clients trying to jump to the conclusion, but it's not that simple. So I think the important thing is, and of course on the other side, you cannot boil the ocean, so you cannot get it all right and then not do anything until you have it all right. So I think there needs to be that good balance between building a foundation and being pragmatic and generating early value, and then indeed look at what it means for you. So I mean, the technology is out there. Again, we work a lot with Microsoft. It's all out there. We as KPMG work with a lot of clients trying to understand how that applies. But that's really where the magic happens when you put together experts like ourselves. You put together technology providers like Microsoft, and then you have the members of an organization that understand their own business very well. Kind of that combination, then you make the technology relevant, because otherwise it's just technology.
Yeah. And where do businesses even begin to understand what data they need to be collecting for this?
Yeah, so that's maybe the biggest thing that's been happening, right?
Yeah.
So when I was talking about regulations, one of the things all these regulations come with is a lot of assessments. So of course, again, when we say sustainability, it's such a big topic that the first question is always, but what does it mean? What do I have to report on? What do I have to focus on? So there's a lot of assessments depending on the different standard regulations you can do to understand, what's relevant to you. So what does sustainability mean for you as an organization? Again, taking one of the ones that we've heard most about is, the double materiality assessment for CSRD. That essentially means it was for every company a way of understanding what sustainability means for them and what topics are relevant for them. And then in the back of that, you start to understand, okay, what data do I actually need? In general, it goes the same principle is, it's going to be very hard to just think of, because it's so broad, it's going to be very hard to say, hey, this is all the data I need, let's go and collect it all. So I think the best thing to do is really to start understanding what sustainability means for you as a business, and then kind of break that down and take steps and build it right, build a foundation, but in the meantime, keep driving progress.
And how is this impacting the jobs market as well? It must be creating amazing opportunities for people to kind of take a bit of a lead on this within their organisation, or go into organisations as the experts, like you say, and support businesses with this journey.
Yeah, so I think we see different interpretations of it, right? And that's very market dependent, that's very organizational dependent. So I think if you look, if you just Google it, you'll find a lot of, for example, chief sustainability officers, which is a role that probably if you would have Googled 2-3 years ago, you would have had a hard time finding anyone. You'll find a lot of sustainability directors, sustainability managers. So it's definitely creating areas in each organization on how can we look at this. And that, of course, then doesn't mean that function becomes its own and operates on its own, but it's a function that should be able to work with the entire organization and facilitate the translation of understanding what sustainability means and how to drive sustainability. And of course, there's also situations where the approach is purely compliance reporting driven. So then what a lot of times you see happening is, they bring that very close to the finance practice, because that's usually where your compliance is done anyway. And then you could have roles like ESG controllers and these type of roles, which a lot of times are essentially financial controllers by background that now look at compliance, auditability, transparency from a sustainability perspective. So it's definitely generated new figures. How they land in the organization, we're seeing differences because it's really much linked to the market. It's very much linked to the ambition of that organization. It's very much linked to the nature of that organization. And in some cases, you also see a lot of hubs popping up, right? So you might see someone focusing on sustainability in each department of an organization, and nothing really formalized or centralized. But it's definitely generating a new way of looking at it, and it's changing existing jobs. So I can speak for myself. I knew very little about sustainability up until 2-3 years ago, because it was simply not my field of expertise. We had in KPMG people working on it for 20 years, but there was no real connection to technology, because it was a very abstract advisory generic service that we provided. And now actually you see it popping up in all our services. So, probably if you talk to a lot of the people in our organization, you're going to find that they know something about sustainability. Some, like myself, had to go a bit more deeper into it. But it's also changing jobs. So I think that's also a nice parallel with AI, right? It might be not as mediatic, but it's definitely also impacting existing roles and jobs.
And it's also doing things for the right reason. And I'm sure there'll be businesses out there that might listen to this and think, now I need to go and get myself a sustainability officer. I need to go. And actually, that isn't necessarily the solution. It's understanding what it means, and actually people within your organisation that can potentially learn more about this. And like you say, 2-3 years ago, this wasn't core to your role, and now it is. So it's just immersing yourself in it and understanding what it means for you as a business.
Yeah, and that's part of the journey we see companies going through. So we have this very nice model in KPMG we show clients where we say, so I look at it from a technology data perspective, but for example, we have colleagues that focus on it really from an organizational change and transformation perspective. And the interesting thing is, we have this sort of journey model, maturity model, you want to call it, which is basically split in 3 steps. So what we see happening is a lot of companies start by creating this, indeed, like you say, as a completely separate function, which is basically trying to somehow install someone and charge them with the duty. Then after that, we see them usually trying to mature towards a more connected model. So actually, yes, you still have a centralized place, but you kind of try as much as possible to connect it to the other departments, functions, and processes. But actually, the target, the end goal, in most cases, is really getting what we say that embedded model, which is basically making sustainability just spread and part of all the sides of your business, which then should get you to a place where you don't require to just have a central figure or a central team to manage it, but it's actually part of everything you do. Doesn't mean you might still need someone to lead it centrally at that point, but the idea needs to really be, and again, it can be in a journey, but the idea needs to be make sustainability part of everything in your business. Don't try to just pass me the word, buy it and install it. It's not how it works.
Have you got any examples of where businesses have done that really, really well?
Yeah, I think look, the critical thing is it's so we talked a lot about why it's important and all that, but I think one critical thing is that this is business critical. There is opportunity to be gained in this area, right? And indeed, if you look at the examples, you can think of Unilever, for example, right? So they have what they call the sustainable living brands or sustainable living products. Essentially, some of the brands under their umbrella, are very much focused on making sustainability everything they do. Okay. So in their product, in their processes, in the way they go to market. And if you read the reports, you can see that they've actually grown, I think, 60 or 70% faster than the other businesses in the same portfolio. Yeah, wow. You have companies like IKEA. If you go through their messaging, you're going to see a lot about circular economy, recycling, a lot around renewable energies. And essentially, if you then really unpack that in the long term, renewable energies also means bringing down operational cost, having that circular economy with products that are purchased back, refurbished, resold, creates actually new revenue streams because you're giving a second life and generating a second revenue out of those products and keeping your customers engaged. You have examples like Tony Chocolate. They were very early on, very clear and very transparent about how they source their ingredients, how they make their chocolate. And thanks to that, they could actually charge a premium and still, probably be the ones that sell most chocolate and make great margins on it. So there's a lot of business opportunity in it. And I think that's where a lot of organizations sometimes miss the point is, the thinking, oh, this is an extra cost, it's another compliance exercise. If you approach it like that, it is. But if you actually start looking at it and making it part of your business, there's actually a market opportunity to be seized. Yeah,
definitely. Just going back to AI, we talked about it a bit earlier, but how do you think AI can help drive sustainable transformation in businesses?
So I think a lot of the conversations we're having is, again, leaving aside 1 second the efficiency bit, because that's I think a bit simple way of approaching it, right? And that's sometimes also the way to start, because simple is not bad. But I mean, you can always say, I'm going to use AI to make my reporting and my analysis more efficient, which means I save time, lower cost, benefit, great. But that's scratching the surface, right? So where I think it's really interesting is when you start to look actually at sector-specific AI use cases, and that's what we're doing with a lot of our sector clients. So depending on the sectors, we're working with our experts and with our technology teams and working with those clients to understand what is valuable in those industries and sectors. But if you think, for example, at something like, any kind of manufacturing / retail consumer good type of organization, for example, the way you design your products, right? So that using AI to maybe think of, hey, how can I, design a product? We use materials that are more cost effective, but it also allow me to generate more margin. So we've been, discussing, for example, I cannot mention the client, but we've been discussing with one client about, can I have a sort of product design cockpit where I'm going to be able to essentially change the materials in my product and not only understand the impact on sustainability of it, but also understand the impact on revenue and cost of it. Yeah. So, there's public data you can use to actually understand if I make my product more sustainable, can I actually charge more for it? So there's a lot of, their AI can help you find that perfect formula. We see a lot of, use cases for it in anything that has to do with ingredients, with raw materials, how you use that, how you combine that, how you can make that more sustainable but also cost effective. We see a lot in real estate around, checking, how sustainable is your assets or your building, for example. But also, if you're going to build a new one or buy a new one, is that a sustainable investment? Because you know that your clients, your leasers will ask about it. So that probably will allow you to have better revenue and better. So I think everything you can use AI for in your industry, and again, I can talk about a lot of use cases we're discussing, but I think the key thing is to understand, okay, where can we make a difference, and where can we actually generate a business opportunity or efficiencies with it? And that's very sector specific. So if you work in manufacturing, you have products, probably starting with your product is a very good place. If you have assets, that's probably a very good place to start. But also if you're a simple, like ourselves, we have our own impact plan, and we're a service company, so we don't necessarily have direct product, but we have a huge impact on society, right? And on how we perform business, and our reputation is everything to us. So we also have our plan and can use AI essentially to help our internal processes and checks to make sure that we operate ethically, transparently, and that's very core in our organization. So there's a lot of opportunity to use AI, understand what sustainability is for you, and then kind of target those areas and find, okay, how can I actually turn sustainability into revenue, into business opportunity?
And AI obviously requires its own energy consumption. How do businesses battle with the sustainability of AI itself?
That's a huge topic, right? So I think if you read the newspapers and if you see the debate on AI, there's a lot to be said about AI, and I think there's going to be a dedicated session. But I think the key thing is a lot of times AI is associated with the negative impact it has. So it is true, it is a fact. So if you want to run, if you want to use more AI, you need more processing power, you need better data centers, you need to consume more energy. So there is kind of a ripple effect on negative impact. What a lot of times is overseen is the positive impact of AI, because whilst it's generating that extra energy and generating that negative impact, it's a lot bigger the positive impact it has, because it is changing, and it is a big driver in every market essentially to actually invest in these topics. So if you kind of try to compare the environmental impact and then look at, okay, but how many companies are actually investing to find new energies? How many companies are actually investing to make their data centers more sustainable? How many companies, by generating efficiencies, new revenues, what are the positive impact related to that? Because if you're more efficient, what you're consuming more in AI, you're actually saving somewhere else. So if you have a more sustainable supply chain, you might be consuming more energy, but ultimately what one organization or one solution is consuming is then saving a lot across a whole value chain and supply chain. So I think the key thing is, yes, AI has a negative environmental impact, and it's something I know tech companies like Microsoft are really invested in and really trying to improve. But you should always put the other side of that scale, which is all the positive impact that comes with it, all the investments that actually go into making it more sustainable, which then have broader impact than just that AI energy bit. So I would say it's true. We need to do better. We need to find a way to make AI more sustainable. But AI is also helping us be more sustainable as a whole society.
If you could leave our viewers and listeners with one key message or takeaway from today's podcast, what would that be?
Yeah, I think every listener, every organization is in a different place of their journey. So I think the key thing for me to share is, really look at what sustainability means for you, look at what it means for your organization, try to understand how you can really gain value from it. So like I said earlier, it's not just about doing good, it's also a business opportunity. So I think it's really important that everyone tries to really embed this into their organization, make your organization as sustainable as possible across, but also really try to find those new opportunities and embrace that change, because it's definitely for every organization something that's relevant. It will mean different things, but there will be something. A lot of times it's underestimated. But the key message I think is, really give it some thought. And then a lot of times it's hard to see it. So probably engage with some expert, get some perspective, get the knowledge, and just really, really embrace these topics in general, so sustainability like AI. Because ultimately what the reality is you need to think of how your organization is going to shift to the future. And as I like to say, these topics are here to stay. So definitely to really understand what it means for each one of you.
And the help is out there, right? People aren't doing this on their own. There's lots of experts, like you say, like you guys, and across the sector that can help companies with this.
Yeah, and I think it's critical to really do that, because I think what I like to think of ourselves as is we're a pin in the middle, because we're talking with a lot of organizations within the same industry, within the same setting. And this is a new journey for everyone. So I mean, engaging with experts, engaging with peers is very helpful to actually learn from each other and take that journey together.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to round off the conversation today, Guido. Thank you so much. Lots of really valuable insights and hopefully some key practical takeaways that people can leave the episode with and go off and explore within their own businesses. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to subscribe wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, leave us a review and share with your network. For more information, visit mtcevents.co.uk where you can find out about past and upcoming episodes of Industry Today. Thank you for joining us.